Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
All right, welcome to today's edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. This is your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. There's so much going on. I just want to laugh. All right. Guys, you've heard of this guest before. We've had him on before. The podcast did well. Gabe, I'm just going to let people know because I just by habit, I am going to continue to look up at the camera because it is right smack in my face. So just remind me and that'll be a part of the podcast. I'm sorry. All right. So guys, all right, let me just let you in on a little secret for this podcast. Nothing is working in the studio. This is the second time this has happened with our guest. You're going to love this guest. You loved him before. We got plenty of commentary on him before, which was absolutely amazing. A lot of people love you, Dr. James, and they know you. And it was refreshing. It was really cool. All right. And so we have him back on, Dr. James Spencer. And now I've got my notes all clouded because I got laptops all over my notes because nothing in the studio was working. So we're trying to rig some laptops. So Dr. James Spencer, he's the president of the D.L Moody Center. Doctor, it's a pleasure to have you back on with us again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carl.
Absolutely. It's listen, you got a new book out called Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. And I'm sitting here and guys, you're going to catch me doing this. I'm looking at the wrong camera and then I'm remembering to look back at the camera that we're using. But I'm so glad that you have this book out. Honestly, I've not read the book. Let me say that up front. I'm going to order this book. Tony texted me yesterday after I was leaving the studio from hosting Mike Gallagher's show and said, hey, this is your guest tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, great. I don't have the book to read, but I know that you can pull it off. And I know that it's a book that people need to read. So let me ask, or let me dive right in, or actually, if you would like to give people an introduction of yourself, Doctor, what you do, talk about the Go Dark, Shine Bright campaign as well. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been running the Go Dark, Shine Bright campaign through the D.L Moody Center for the last 3 years. We've had just over 50,000 participants in the May campaign. We run it every May. And essentially what it is, it's a way for us to encourage and challenge other Christians to step away from the stories that are hindering them from growing spiritually and moving toward stories that will help them grow spiritually. And so it was originally conceived as a 10-day social media fast where people would take 10 days off of their social media platforms to pray and study the scriptures. And then after those 10 days, they'd go back onto social media and give a testimony about how God met them during their 10-day fast. This year, we've expanded it a little bit, and we're encouraging people to think about all the media that they consume, not just social media, but any media that may be distracting them from sitting at the feet of Jesus. And we're asking them to take a fast from that, again, so that they can stop listening to the world and start listening to Jesus. So that's the basics of the campaign.
I love this campaign. Our church does it with the youth in particular, but I'm thinking we need to do it with adults, probably starting with myself, frankly. I'm always, I'm reading incessantly, what's the latest breaking news? Jesus, help me. So I think that I need to participate in that campaign, but I absolutely love the concept of it because I do feel like we're so bombarded by the world, which is what I want to get into with you in just a second here, that we are easily distracted. This appears to be the message of your book, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. And I do wonder, like, you step away from, let me just go ahead and confess to you and Jesus at the same time, Doc. All right. So Tucker Carlson, I'm sure you've heard the big news with Tucker Carlson off of Fox News. And so one thing that I do is I watch Tucker Carlson every night. I don't watch a lot of TV news shows, but I'll watch the intros to some of the main shows and just kind of see their monologues. But Tucker, I was like, he was my favorite. And so not watching him, I've been literally sitting on my lanai, reading, thinking, and I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to have to not be consumed by media, and I'm sitting here thinking, last night I was working on my lawn and I'm like, oh man, I'm thinking about God, I'm thinking about new things, and I'm like, I may need to do this more often. Good God, have mercy. All right.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I think there's a way, where we aren't isolated from the world, and so what we're not calling for in the fast is a complete detachment from what's going on in the world. I think
sure.
Christians need to understand how the world's broken, what good things are going on in the world, but at the same time, there's a slew of information coming at us, and we need to get better at ignoring some of it.
Man, that's so well said. Let me read a couple of ads real quick here before we get into our interview, deeper into our interview with Dr. James Spencer. Again, he's the president of the D.L Moody Center. You can check out his website, jamesgspencer.com. Spencer spelled Spencer. And he heads up the Go Dark, Shine Bright campaign, which we just spoke about briefly. He's got a new book out called Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. I think this is an extremely important message, one that I need to hear, quite frankly. And I'm starting to wonder if that's why we were having technical difficulties for the second time with you, Doc. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit. All right. So, guys, I want to talk to you about Big George Foreman. All right. So from Affirmed Film comes Big George Foreman. It's the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world. I remember watching that comeback fight, based on the true story of one of the greatest comebacks of all time and the transformational power of second chances. Big George Foreman, starring Chris Davis and Academy Award winner Forrest Whitaker, is rated PG-13, so it may not be appropriate for children under 13. Only in theaters beginning April 28th, which is today. So for tickets and showtimes, go to biggeorgeforeman.movie. And guys, if it looks like I'm looking down and reading a script, it's because I am, because our camera isn't working. So I'm having to figure out all types of different angles. So this is fun. All right, Doc. What inspired you to write on this topic, Christian resistance? That's a very fascinating title to me, Learning to Defy the World.
Yeah, it feels like it's something that I've gotten back around to. I actually started an essay that I never published in 2007 called Resistance as a Crucial Component of Spiritual Formation. And so the general idea about this is that Christians need to learn to not let certain things in. Or they need to understand, the way I like to say it is, where they end and where the world begins. And so if you picture it sort of like a dam holding back water, the water and the dam are in contact. There's not a clear separation between the water and the dam, and yet the dam holds its shape. There's a sense in which all the pressure that the water is exerting on that dam is being held back, and the concrete and all the materials that are used to build that dam are holding their shape. And so Christian resistance is sort of like that. It's a question of, can Christians hold their shape despite the pressures of the world, so that there's a clarity of where we end and the world begins. And I think that's something that is really important today as we think about what it looks like for us to navigate a culture that is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. How do we operate in this culture so that we retain that shape and we can really demonstrate who Christ is in a world that is increasingly uninterested or antithetical to him?
That is so well said. I feel like, and obviously this message is timeless here, Doc. I just feel like there are so many pressures that seemingly didn't exist even 5 years ago, where I feel like Christians, or many Christians, are being shaped by the world rather than vice versa. And it's almost amazing to me, where I think for the first time since God saved me, I feel like the Christian influence has waned so much in culture. It's absolutely astonishing to watch.
Yeah, and I think if we go to something like a Matthew 6, right? Matthew 6, Jesus gives 3 teachings: almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. And basically, what he does is he tells his disciples to not do something and to do something. So he gives a negative examples. He says, don't give like this, don't pray like this, don't fast like this. Instead, give like this, pray like this, fast like this. And so he's creating a sort of implicit critique of the world in order to inform his disciples' practice. And I think that that's something that we've gotten away from. We've focused a lot on sort of the positive disciplines, we could call them, right? Let's pray, let's read our Bibles, let's, do X, Y, and Z. But because we've been a little short on critiquing the practices of the world and really deeply understanding why it is that they're antithetical to Christ, I think we've lost something in our discipleship. And in addition to that, I think where we're at right now is because we haven't really been looking strongly at the context and how it's forming and shaping us, I think we're missing out on new practices that we need to begin integrating into our lives to allow us to be disciples in this moment. And so in the book, I talk about what I would consider to be, sort of categories of thought or biblically rooted themes that aren't usually treated in devotional literature. Things like the imitation of Christ, you see a lot. But let's say relevance. How do we determine what's relevant in a given moment? How do we spend our attention? What does it look like for us to really deeply understand how we relate to time? And I think at this point, just given our media environment, given everything that's going on around us, we probably need to be rethinking some of the resources that we're giving people to develop into disciples so that there are just these new, fresh angles where we begin to understand who we are as Christians in today's world a little bit differently.
When you say resources, what do you mean? What type of new resources should we be looking at? What type of new resources should local churches be looking at?
I think we have to keep all the tried and true sort of things that we've been doing, right?
Okay.
I don't think we'll ever get away from Bible study, prayer, fasting, those kind of things. They're the staples. That's what we need.
Fundamentals.
But what I really think we need is a new angle on understanding, just like in Matthew 6, where Jesus is saying, don't give like this, don't pray like this, don't fast like this. I think we need to start looking and saying, don't consume news like this. Don't covet your neighbors like this.
Wow.
Right?
Good.
Don't construct the good life like this. And then we need to offer the alternative of that. Instead, look at these things from this perspective. When you're watching the news, don't just incessantly watch the news, even though there's nothing new really happening.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't just look at your neighbor's Instagram feed and think, wow, they have such a better life than me. Like, recognize that most people capture the best of life on Instagram, right?
So true.
And that there's a lot you're not seeing, and so we just have to do a better job, I think, of recontextualizing ourselves in this moment and then giving people the categories, the theological categories, the biblical categories, to really understand how to go about being disciples at this time.
And I think that's so important. Like I think that oftentimes, let me put it this way, Doc. When God saved me, actually, it was just a radical transformation. I mean, I was living a very ghetto fabulous lifestyle, and then literally, my life changed so quickly. The people that were around me were like, "Are you nuts?" I mean, it was that God just moved in a miraculous way. But one of the things that I started paying attention to that I didn't care about was politics and how the world worked through politics and how things were taking place in politics. Like, I literally would see things that I didn't see before. And I'm not speaking, obviously metaphorically here, but abortion and all these issues that really didn't matter to me before. I was like, wow, Satan is using politics I never even thought about that type of stuff. And I just think Christians, we are charged with, we have such an awesome responsibility, I believe, to not only share the gospel, but to understand how relevant the word of God is in every aspect of our life. And honestly, I think people are hungry for that today, Doc. Like, I do ask the question why, or where is God in this? How is this relevant to the Bible? And I feel like a lot of Christianity doesn't necessarily, and I'm so far from perfect, it's not even funny. But that is a conviction that I have. Like, I'll look at an issue, and one of my instincts is, okay, God, what's going on here? I'm not even sure a lot of Christians ask that question anymore.
Yeah, and I think there's one of the chapters in the book that I do is called Response. And I point to the narrative where David and Saul are in the cave. So, David and
Yes.
his men are hiding in this cave. Saul
Right.
comes in to relieve himself. David has this opportunity to kill Saul, who has been chasing him down. David is the anointed king of Israel. Saul's been chasing him down, trying to kill him. Now David's got this opportunity. His men are saying, look, God has delivered Saul into your hand. And David says, no, I'm not going to do anything to Saul. He even feels bad for cutting off a corner of his robe. But he in that moment, David responds to God as opposed to responding to the situation. And I think that's what we really need to learn to do is if we really believe that God is the most relevant actor and factor in any situation we face, what we're constantly trying to develop then is a sense of God's presence and understanding that he's actually there that allows us a broader range of actions, quite frankly, than we could ever muster ourselves. And I think that we do that through just the everyday obediences. And that way, whenever we see some of these things that are happening in politics, right, we have sort of the eyes to look and see what's really happening, the ears to listen in a way that we can actually hear what's going on. And then the spiritual discernment and sort of broad action set where we have opportunity to address those issues in powerful ways that may not look like political engagement, that may not look like, going out and picketing or what have you. I think all those are appropriate and within the range of Christian activity. But I also think that we shouldn't set aside things like, prayer, taking the time to really discern theologically. These are important actions. They're not passive. They're actually actively engaging God in this moment, trying to discern where he would have us go, which, again, our conviction should lead us to realize that where he would have us go is always better than where we would have us go.
Man, that's good stuff. Good stuff. And I know there's a lot of heathens out there, Doc, that need to hear this, especially my producers here. But no, we all need to hear this. Guys, I want you to get this book, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. Doc, I'm going to be getting this book, and I want to read through it because obviously it's easy for me being in a political arena to look at you can have the tendency to feel moral and all this kind of stuff. Hey, listen, we're battling these little commies and all this kind of, but it's, it can be a dangerous world, and you can easily get wrapped up into that, get distracted by the politics. And sometimes, I have to check myself. Oh, okay, God, help me. I literally had to start telling myself the other week, I was just praying and it hit me. Hate leftism, love the leftists.
That's right. Well, it's an important point because I think, the political realm is an environment in which Christians should be proclaiming the gospel. But if it becomes more than that, if it becomes something that's essential and necessary, like we won't be able to be Christian unless American democracy continues. Yeah, we're missing something in those kind of statements. And so we have to keep it in its place. And when we keep it in its place, it's extremely important. It is God-given. It's God-ordained. It's there to restrain evil. And so speaking into it and saying, why aren't you restraining this evil or that evil, is completely within the realm of Christian appropriateness. We just have to make sure that we scope it correctly and make sure we don't give it more than it should have.
Sure. All right.
More weight in our lives than it should have.
That totally makes sense. And obviously that's applicable to just about every aspect of life. Again, I'm speaking to our guest, Dr. James Spencer. He's the president of the D.L Moody Center. He's got a new book out, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. I have a few more questions for you, Doc, and we'll just go rapid fire. We were having technical difficulties for literally like 30 minutes. So Doc has to go soon. I so appreciate your patience. Let me just talk to you guys real quickly about My Pillow. Mike Lindell at the company mypillow.com. He's a fabulous patriot, a great guy. He's a Christian himself, and he's providing American jobs, American manufacturing. Right now, he's out with a new pillow, My Pillow 2.0. I didn't think it could get any better, but I actually do use his pillows. I love his pillows. I didn't think he could beat the first one. He has. He has a new temperature regulating thread on the outer layer of the pillow, the same adjusted patented feel as the original My Pillow, but now the pillow is softer, it's smoother, and it's cooler. All you have to do to get your buy one, get one free offer is go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, and I'm looking at the wrong camera, I just realized, and click on the radio listener square and enter the name Carl, C-A-R-L. Oh, my Lord. All right, mypillow.com. Click on the radio listener square, enter the name Carl, C-A-R-L, or give them a call, 800-858-0263, 800-858-0263. To get your My Pillow buy one, get one free offer. I'm laughing here, guys, because my producer, Gabe, could have said, Carl, you're a moron. You're looking at the wrong camera. But I think he wanted to torture me so that this would be up on the podcast. So anyway, if you see me looking at nothing is working in the studio, guys. So this is actually, it's making the podcast, it's making me happy today. Ironically, I have reasons to smile today, even though it's a little bit torturous. Again, I'm speaking with my guest, Dr. James Spencer. He's the president of the D.L Moody Center. Check out his website, jamesgspencer.com. He's got a new book out, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. This is a very timely and important message. He also leads up the Go Dark, Shine Bright campaign, going dark on social media period for a 10-day period. They do it every May, and focus on God. It's absolutely amazing. I've gone dark at 8 p.m. every night this week since Tucker is off, and it's been amazing. It's been eye-opening. I can't imagine what 10 days straight will do, but it's been eye-opening. All right, so Doc, let me ask you this: what's the current status of the American church, in your opinion?
I think the American church is probably filled with some level of stress and anxiety. I think we need to remember that we are part of an unshakable kingdom, and that we can be far calmer and far more at peace than we are. I think that a lot of people, if I think about Luke chapter 8, let's say, in the parable of the sower, I think we're in a situation where more of us need to be pursuing the good soil where we can really bear fruit, as opposed to getting caught up in the anxieties of the world's wealth, chasing after things that we really don't need or won't help us imitate Christ. And so at the same time, I think there are movements within the church that are really deeply seeking revival. And I think that there's always that sort of tension within the church. You know, broad scopes, we're broken people. We're always going to see brokenness. We're always going to see problems. But underlying that, God is always faithful. And he's always got people in his body who are sort of pushing in new directions, asking and challenging those who are in the body of Christ to grow spiritually, to come together, and to provide a corporate witness to Christ that is both true and compelling. So I think that the church right now, where we're really at, we just need to get back to the basics. Let's get back to discipleship. Yeah. Let's not make it harder than it needs to be. Let's just do the little acts of obedience and test God through that obedience. Like one of my favorite passages, Malachi 3:10, where, you know, the Israelites are holding back food from God. And God tells them, listen, just bring the full tithe of the storehouse. The strategy you're using is never going to work. You're never going to be able to hoard enough food away for you to have security. The best way for you to have security, just obey me. Test me through that obedience and see if I don't show up. And I think that's what we need to do in the little acts of obedience that we are maybe failing to perform day in and day out.
Man, you know what's so crazy? This is always it's always relevant. I mean, I'm hearing this stuff. I know this stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. And let me just read a quote from your book and get you to respond here, Doc. You say, I'm convinced that one of the biggest challenges we face as Christians is also one of the most mundane: distraction. We must, I'm having a hard time seeing because now this is under the lights. We must learn to resist the urgencies and emergencies that pressure us to dismiss God in favor of the arbitrary expectations we adopt as we live in a broken world. We resist by following God's instruction and attributing all we are and have to Him. Essentially, I think that's what you explained. But if you want to expand on that, that'd be great.
Well, there's two narratives that I go to sort of illustrate this idea, or really from which the idea derives. I'll say it like that. The narrative of Mary and Martha. If you think about what Martha is doing as has Jesus in her home, she's attending to the matters of hospitality that would have been expected of anyone hosting a guest at that time. It doesn't seem like she's doing anything horribly wrong, right?
Right.
She's just preparing things. And in that preparation, she loses sight of Jesus. The preparation and the hospitality becomes more important than the guest. And it actually says that she was distracted. And that's where a lot of this, I think, draws from, is that Mary is not following the conventions of the day. She's rightly recognizing that she's choosing the good portion, that Jesus is here, I'm going to sit at his feet and forget all the rest of the conventions, forget what everybody expects. Jesus is here. And so as Martha allows those conventions to sort of drive her forward and to drive her actions, what she ends up losing is time with Christ. And so as we look out, sort of the landscape of our day, we're going to be hit with a lot of, it's not a call for Christians just to be completely lazy and, shirk all their responsibilities or something like that.
Sure.
But it is a recognition that, listen, a lot of the conventions, a lot of the expectations that we put on ourselves or that we adopt from our culture are sort of quasi-fictional. They're not as essential often as we think they are. And we could set those aside and not do them. And people are going to care less than we think, right? And we're going to then have opportunities to be with Christ in new ways. So I'll give just an illustration of that. I'm sitting here, I got my phone sort of off to the left, and people have been texting me.
Right.
I'm ignoring them. I know that normally when, somebody texts you, like for me, at least, it feels like I should get back to them almost immediately.
Yeah. Same
right?
here. Same here. Yeah.
Right. But nobody cares. Nobody cares that I don't get back to them immediately. I can respond to those texts 5 hours from now and they're going to be fine.
Right.
They're not really expecting that. That's an expectation that I'm putting on myself. And so if I can set that aside and just focus in on what I'm doing right now, then I avoid that distraction and I don't feel the pressure like to care for things in this moment, that urgency, right? The emergency or urgency that would press me into being distracted from just talking to you right at this moment. So that's really the first narrative that I go to. The second one is in Exodus when Moses sees the Egyptian mistreating the Hebrew. And he goes over and he kills the Egyptian, he buries the Egyptian in the sand. And in that moment, Moses is responding to something that he sees as extremely important. His concerns aren't illegitimate, right? Like the Egyptians shouldn't be oppressing the Hebrew.
Right.
But the way he addresses it is in his own power, in his own flesh. He doesn't think through the rest of the situation. He doesn't understand what's going to happen next. He just reacts. And we need to avoid that as well. There needs to be a time for action, but those actions really need to be driven not simply by the physical needs that we see in the world, but we have to look at it from multiple angles and ask ourselves, okay, this is a physical problem. This is a political problem. This is an educational problem, whatever they may be. But it's also a spiritual problem. And we're not particularly capable of addressing spiritual problems the way we think we would be. Yeah. And so we need to understand where God is going, how he would like us to participate with him in, resolving some of the brokenness that we see in the world, as opposed to just reacting and trying to make the situation better, because sometimes our interventions are going to make things a little worse. And so I
Man.
think we see that in that narrative with Moses.
And you know why I think this book is so timely here, Doc? I can't wait to get my hands on it. Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World, because I am thinking about, as you were talking, I'm thinking about the things that are going off in my own head. I literally have to, okay, Carl, stop, breathe. It's okay. The example that you gave, I get emails, texts, like it's like rapid fire. It feels like a fire hose sometimes coming right at me. And I'm like, okay, relax. You can focus here. You don't have, I had to do that yesterday because I was literally just spazzing out for all these things I had to get to. I literally had to sit back and say, it's okay. These people are going to be fine without you. You can respond later. It's amazing. That hits the nail on the head. But I love that you're out with this book now too, because I'm thinking of COVID and I'm thinking of the lockdowns here, Doc. And I feel like so many people have walked away from God, have walked away from the church. But I also feel like the world has gotten so crazy. And I'm speaking of America specifically, so crazy, so quickly, from trans issues to racial issues that didn't even seem to exist just a few years ago, where I think people are desperate for God in a new and fresh and real way. And I feel like they're searching for meaning outside of the world. So if Christians just stick to the basics, people will come back. We're seeing that at our church now. We're seeing just a boom in youth that are coming back to the church. Like whatever they experienced in the world, it just wasn't enough. Your response to that?
No, I agree. I think that right now what we're sort of suffering under, I would call it a coordination problem. And so if you think about the body of Christ in terms of, sort of a gawky teenager that grew 6 inches but hasn't put on any weight, right? And so their arms don't seem like they work right. They're a little clumsy. And that's how I kind of picture the body of Christ sometimes. And what we really need is coordination. And I think coordination is ever more crucial now, because we're facing sort of the coordinating mechanisms of the world, education, media. They're feeding messages into our brains in ways that we don't often even realize. And as we hear those messages, what we have a tendency to do is sort of begin to make excuses to agree with those messages because it's easier. And we don't want to buck the system when no one else is really bucking the system with us. When that sort of critical mass comes in on us, it's like, man, am I going to be the only one standing up? It gets lonely. The church is the antidote to that loneliness. And so if we can focus in on discipleship, that discipleship is our method of coordination. It's what says, in the Gospels, it was, hey, the 12 of us, or it turned out 11 of us, right? We're sticking with Jesus really no matter what. We've always got each other. And, despite their failings and their flaws, they stuck together. And discipleship allows us the opportunity to say, there are other Christians who are going to be willing to suffer the consequences of standing for what's right. And it's great to know that, because now I don't feel alone. And so as we can coordinate through discipleship, as we can coordinate in the local church, as we can bring people in and help them understand that not everybody thinks the way that we're maybe learning in schools or the way that we're seeing in the media, I think we'll have a much more powerful testimony and a much stronger, encouraging sort of community than we have anywhere else.
That's good stuff. Good stuff, Doc. Listen, I've got one more question for you. I know you need to get out of here. I actually had several, but because of our technical difficulties, I'm limited. I can't even get my words out. I'm going to limit it to one. All right, but I do have to do this ad real quick. Guys, I want to talk to you about Pardon by Grace. I hope that you feel inspired by this podcast. I certainly do. Sometimes I used to hear pastors say this, and I feel like this podcast is helping to shape that for me, or to visualize that. Sometimes we just need a spiritual shower. And I feel like that's what we're getting here today with Dr. James Spencer. Again, he's the president of the D.L Moody Center. He's got a new book out, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. He also leads up the campaign, Go Dark, Shine Bright. I encourage you to check that out, learn more about that as well. It's fascinating. Go dark on social media. Focus in on God. It's definitely something needed. It'll give you a new perspective. I've been joking around, but I'm completely serious. There's some things that I do daily in my routine. Tucker Carlson was one of them. And literally, I've shut the TV off. I've sat on my lanai. I've worked on my yard, and and I just think and I pray, and it's amazing just having that quiet time where I'm just like, So we all need that. And we all need to feel inspired, but we all need to know we need to be inspired by our maker, by our creator God. And I think in those quiet times, he'll do that. But here's a film I want to talk to you about real quickly. Pardoned by Grace. From the makers of Graham Family Films comes a powerful and inspiring true story. It's going to touch your heart. It's going to renew your faith. Introducing Pardoned by Grace. It's the incredible journey of Scott Heiberger. He's played by actor Joey Lawrence. He's a convicted criminal turned prison minister. He defies all the odds and receives an unlikely pardon to continue his ministry on the outside, featuring Grammy Award-winning singer and songwriter Michael W. Smith as Heiberger's pastor. Pardoned by Grace showcases the transformative power of redemption and the boundless reach of God's love. You can watch Pardoned by Grace on Salem Now, and when you purchase a copy at salemnow.com or purchase a DVD, portions of that will be donated to Scott Heiberger's nonprofit prison organization, Behind the Wire Ministries, which provides hope and support to the incarcerated. Together, we can share the power of faith and forgiveness with those who need it most. I'm looking at the wrong camera again. Visit salemnow.com to purchase your DVD and donate to this incredible ministry today. So I appreciate that Salem teams up with the things that absolutely matter. And again, I'm speaking with my guest, Dr. James Spencer, president of the D.L Moody Center. Again, visit his website, jamesgspencer.com. Get his book, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World. This is so critically needed. Oftentimes, I look at how crazy America has become, and I just sit here and I say, Doc, man, or I think, just you don't have to do anything except be who God created you to be, and you'll be good. I mean, like that's. And I'm speaking to myself. Let me just say this and get your response, and we'll close out here. I wrote down here, the temptation or the struggle to be liked or accepted by the world seems just as prevalent amongst adults today and people of faith. I can recall back when I was a kid, I always struggled. You want to be liked by this person. You want to be liked by that person. You want to be accepted by this group. But it always seemed to me that adults, at least when I was a kid, kind of had their acts together. It doesn't seem that way anymore. It seems like the temptation and the struggle to always be accepted by the world is so strong amongst children, amongst adults, amongst the non-Christians, amongst Christians even.
I think I'll say two things. Number one, Augustine has a lot to say about this. He talks about and warns believers to beware of offices where the well done that is given by men becomes something that they are chasing. And he basically talks about that sort of approval that we chase as seeking glorification instead for ourselves, as opposed to seeking the glory of God. And so I think it's been a temptation for a very long time. I mean, Augustine wrote even before the modern era. And so we do tend to want that sort of, we like to be liked. And I think everybody likes to be liked. And there's something about being liked that suggests to us that we're doing the right things. And so we have to begin sort of disconnecting and teasing that out. Occasionally when I teach, what I'll talk about is the difference between popularity and wisdom. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's particularly wise. You know, the broad public consensus doesn't necessarily make it right. There's a lot of people that can be wrong about things. And so we have to sort of distinguish between popularity and wisdom. And I think one of the best places to go with that is just the ministry of Jesus.
Hmm.
There's a lot of time where Jesus is actually compelling and people are attracted to him. He was sort of magnetic. The things he was doing were interesting, and people wanted to be near him because they thought, maybe they could benefit from him. But they also just found him to be an interesting human being that had something new and fresh to say until he didn't.
Hmm.
In John, you see it in John 6, where he starts talking about eating my flesh and drinking my blood if you're going to follow me. And it says many of his disciples left him that day.
Man,
And
great point.
so, yeah, it just comes to this moment where we have to disconnect what's right from what's likable.
Hmm.
And so, the Christian message in my mind is not irresistible. We have many people who are going to reject it. Jesus tells us that we'll be hated for his sake. And so we shouldn't necessarily expect to be liked. So that's the first aspect of it. But the other side of it, I think, is actually also problematic, which is I think we are in an unprecedented environment to covet. If you think about coveting and in yesteryear, right, where maybe I'd see, my 15 neighbors around me, all right, I had that level of opportunity to covet things. My neighbor gets a new
Wow.
car, or maybe
Such
they
a
have
good point.
right. Like my old school ways, right? My neighbors across the street had a TV with a remote, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, right? Because my
Right.
parents still had the little dial, and I was the remote. Like, go up there and change the channel, son.
Right.
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 But I mean, that's a pretty limited degree of coveting.
Hmm.
But now we have windows to a world where we can covet almost anything.
Hmm.
And I think that is in part driving this sort of obsession to be liked. Because
Yeah.
as we try to keep up with the Joneses, what we're really looking at is back at our own lives and saying, we're not enough. What we have is not enough. What God has given us is not enough. He has misallocated the resources and gifts, and I need to correct this. And part of the way we do that is by seeking the sort of the legitimation from others that we don't feel we're getting from God. And so we become discontent, and that discontentment opens us up, I think, to a greater degree of desire to be liked and accepted by a community that really doesn't have God's good for us in mind.
That's really good stuff. And honestly, that explains a lot. If you think about some of the things that are occurring today, some of the things that people are buying into. And I'm like, yeah, we all agreed that that was crazy just 30 seconds ago. Like, come on, guys. But that makes total sense. Listen, Doc, I know you need to go. And I so apologize for I can't believe 2 times in a row we've had Dr. James Spencer on. And 2 times, both other times, we had serious connection problems, and we experienced that again today. You almost wonder if there's something going on from the enemy. I'm just saying. But anyway, this is I always love speaking to you. When I get back on one of these national shows, I'm going to have you come on. I'm going to get your book. I'm going to read through it. I think this is highly needed for today. I think this book is extremely timely. I will say this too about you, Doc. If you ever get tired of being a theologian and an intellectual, I would say in theology, you got some serious pipes. So you may want to go into singing there. But so
Yeah.
anyway, all right. But listen, man, I always love having you on. I remember the first time that we had you on. I literally texted my producer afterwards because I was like, okay, who is this guy? So on, etc. And then I was like, wow, okay. He's good. He convicted me. I feel like a true sinner right now. But we need that. We seriously need that. And honestly, we need smart people. To be frank, I think in the church as well. I mean, that can help us navigate not only through the Bible, but through this world that we live in and make sense of it. And I think you're doing that, Doc. So I really appreciate you, man.
Well, thanks, Carl. I always enjoy being on, and technical difficulties aside, it's no big deal, man. I get it. I do enough of these meetings myself that I know how it goes.
All right. Well, we
not
appreciate
a problem.
it. All right, we appreciate it, Doc. If you'll just stay up for just a second here, to Gabe, just let us know to make sure that we've got everything up. God forbid we start off with technical difficulties and we end with them. So Gabe will let us know that we're up. But in the meantime, guys, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast. You can go to thecarljacksonshow.com. Wherever you go to get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Rumble channel, if you like The Carl Jackson Show. I'm on social media, even though I obviously need to go dark for a while, but I'm on social media, The Carl Jackson Show, wherever I am on social media, Twitter, Getter, True Social, Instagram, you name it, The Carl Jackson Show. That is where I am. I appreciate you guys tuning in to this edition. I hope you've gotten something from it. I certainly have. Go out and get the book, Christian Resistance, Learning to Defy the World by Dr. James Spencer. Again, check out his website, jamesgspencer.com. Doc, again, we appreciate you. And for those of you in the listening audience, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.